G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you a really interesting way to optimize your rehabilitation from almost any lower limb injury, but also to help you optimize your recovery from exercise or activity. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use passive air compression techniques. And today we're going to use that in the form of the Quineer leg compression system. So let's get into it. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, recovery has always been focused around the RICE protocol. Rest, ice, compression, elevation. We've actually started to move away from those practices. And part of the reason for this is we're starting to understand that the reasoning behind why we've used these things has been a little bit disconnected from what they're actually doing to the body. For example, we're moving away from the use of ice to treat acute injuries because although ice is really good at influencing pain, swelling, and inflammation, pain, swelling, and inflammation are crucial features of the healing process. And without them, we aren't as efficiently moving through that healing process as we could be. What we're understanding now is that if you are icing your tissue, you may be putting pause on that healing process because as that tissue cools down, blood flow decreases, swelling may congest more easily, and the inflammatory process may be hindered until you take the ice pack off, the tissue reheats again, and the natural order of things is restored. And while rest, compression, and elevation have similar influences on hindering the body's ability to just do the thing that it's trying to do, we're now looking for techniques and devices that don't stop the body from doing what it's trying to do, but lean into optimizing that process. So the purpose of a leg recovery system like this is to use air compression to effectively compartmentally pump any congestion, swelling, or fluid away from the affected area. Because your lymphatic system is a passive system that requires active muscle activity to flush those things out of your legs so that it can be processed and removed. And devices like this one can allow that process to happen passively when you're doing something else. So while ideally the best way to optimize that recovery is to gently use your tissue in a way that is respectful to how it feels in that moment, it's now possible that once you've exhausted your activity for the day, you can then flick on the TV, pass the baton to a passive air compression system to continue that recovery and rehabilitation. So while I want to show you how this works in a second, it's important to talk about how you can use it to your advantage. If you are someone who has sprained your ankle or hurt your knee and there's swelling and congestion that you want to get under control as quickly as possible, then a passive air compression system can be a fantastic way to more quickly get that tissue to decongest, which may then in turn improve how your pain feels because there's not as much pressure in the area. And we know that the ability to decongest your tissue is so highly valuable because the faster we can decongest you, the faster your pain may decrease, and the more muscle wasting, muscle stiffness and tightness we can prevent against, ultimately allowing you to get back on your feet faster. But one of the real game changers for me as a physiotherapist is we can use these same devices for people post-operation. If you've had a knee replacement, a hip replacement, or any other lower limb surgery, instead of just letting you rest and put your feet up for 3 or 4 days and hope that things take care of themselves, we can now respectfully put you in a device like this at a pressure that feels comfortable and respectful to you, and get that process of decongestion and decreasing your pain and restoring your normal function to begin almost immediately. And things like this have started to change the way that we think of what's possible as to how quickly you can recover post-injury or post-surgery. And having said that, if you are someone that isn't injured and you just love to exercise and you want to make sure that you recover as quickly as possible, again, an active recovery is always best. You use your tissue in a similar way than what fatigued you the first time to engage the right muscles to try and facilitate that removal of congestion and waste as quickly as possible. But just like everyone else, if you then have to go to work or you have to travel, putting yourself in a pair of these may allow you to continue to optimize that recovery process, giving you the best chance to be back to full capacity as soon as your body's going to let you. With that being said, let's get into showing you how it works. So when using these devices, we do recommend having both legs involved. That goes without saying if you want to recover from some exercise. Even if you've just sprained one ankle, just to help optimize that decongestive process. You can do it in a long sitting position as long as you don't feel like you're slouching through your back. Obviously good to do it lying down, do it in front of the television, have your phone, read a book, do something that you might otherwise be doing, but just have this device working at the same time. And essentially how it looks is that once you turn it on, with this Quineer device, it starts to inflate straight away. The idea with these devices is it's compartmental compression. So while there's nothing in there at the moment, generally there's segments in each part of the leg where one will inflate, another will inflate, another will inflate, and so on. And then depending on the device that you use, you can set programs that will make them coordinate in certain ways. If we're best trying to mimic what the body does naturally, it makes sense that we want to try and compress the most distal or furthest away part of you first, and then sequentially compress further and further up, trying to flush that congestion and swelling up, in most cases against gravity if you're on your feet, just so that your lymphatic system gets a boost. Ideally, you don't want to do it beyond about half an hour or so. You want to give your body a break and do something else. You can set the pressure as to how much compression you feel each body part gets. With my patients clinically, if you're recovering from an injury, sometimes it doesn't like the extreme pressures, but you can obviously bump it down to a level that feels appropriate and sustainable for you. At the end of the day, we're trying to optimize something that your body is already trying to do. So you need to use your common sense, listen to what your body says, and adjust as needed. But I'm going to relax and I'll speed through this so you can see the pattern of what's happening with these boots. So ultimately, if you are trying to optimize your recovery from an injury or just general exercise, investing in a passive air compression system could enhance that experience significantly. As I mentioned, it's important to remember that these devices on their own are no substitute for getting out there and using and moving your tissue at whatever level feels appropriate to you. They are best used as an added extra to pass the torch to, that you can keep recovering and rehabilitating your tissue where you would otherwise potentially be sitting down and increasing the congestion, increasing your muscle stiffness, and hindering your recovery. As I mentioned, the team at Coynier were good enough to send me through one of their leg compression systems. If you are in the market for one and you're looking for an alternative to other devices out there, I'll leave a link in the description with a discount code attached. But as always, I genuinely hope that was helpful and insightful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Were you aware that we're now starting to move away from that rest ice compression protocol? If this was helpful, please leave a like rating on the video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want more information and videos like this. But as always, I genuinely hope that was helpful in some way, and I'll see you next time.